With regards to indigenous objects, and of course, I'm mentioning here the curator Pablo León de la Barre, who very interestingly posted on his Instagram. He went to Museo del Barro in Paraguay, and he posted a really beautiful picture of a series of plumage and textiles made by indigenous people in Paraguay. And of course, the indigenous culture in Paraguay is absolutely huge, and Guarani is one of the official languages, and etc. And I suppose his point was that we should not understand only and curate those objects as part of ethnography, but also treat it as art. And I thought it was a very interesting approach that the museum took. Unfortunately, I haven't been to Paraguay. I'd love to go. What are your thoughts on there, whilst telling the histories of objects of indigenous Amerindian populations in Latin America? So far, we've had a very, again, Eurocentric, even Latin Americans may have had a very Eurocentric approach to studying objects made by Amerindians in Latin America. What are your thoughts on there, Kiki?
Wow, that's again very, it's a very complex question.
Yeah.
But I would say if perhaps this museum is the museum I'm thinking of, I'm not quite sure. But this particular museum in Paraguay, I think it's this museum that has systematically worked not only with indigenous objects, but also vernacular production as, as artworks per se.
Yes.
And it is a very, interesting, take. And Pablo and I, when we did we were in the same team for the Santa Fe Biennial.
Oh, right, really? Yeah.
Yeah, and Santa Fe is in New Mexico, which is the state in America where there's the biggest, largest, indigenous presence.
Wow.
So this was something that was also informing the way we curated the show. Like we were in this, in this territory where, indigenous populations have quite a strong presence, and they're not in an ideal position, there's still a lot of, problems there.
Right, yeah.
But compared to Brazil, for instance.
Well, this is what I'm trying to get at, because I think it's a quite pertinent question, because I'm talking about decolonization.
Yes.
Of these objects and works of art. And I think that, Pablo's Instagram post, we're talking about digital here because it's everywhere, sort of tells that story very briefly and quite beautifully, I think.
Yeah, but
decolonizing objects.
But I think we have to be a bit careful. I'm not talking specifically about the Instagram post. I don't even know. Yes, no,
of course.
But
I just, it brought my attention.
Yeah.
That
I mean, I would personally like to see more, not only scholarship, but access to indigenous cultures in Brazil. Because I mean, all the other Latin American countries I've been to, they have, with the exception of Argentina maybe, but they have this really interesting museums dedicated to pre-Columbian culture.
So you see Mexico, for instance.
Well, Mexico is stunning, but also Colombia,
Yes.
And in Brazil, as as school children, we don't have any access to that whatsoever. Yeah.
It is really quite shocking.
So, but maybe we should, I don't know what this Museum of Indigenous Arts could be, but definitely I think there's a contemporary indigenous production that is within the, what we call the contemporary art circuit.
Yes. That's. I think also the universities should change the discourse.
Yeah.
I'm talking about Latin American universities.
But I think this is quite a discussion that's, been going around for a while in Brazil. first with the popularity of Eduardo Viveiro de Castro's writings, and then Davi Copenava, and you know, like all these discussions are very much alive at the moment in Brazil. And you know, I know curators who are currently working with contemporary indigenous people, contemporary indigenous artists.
No, you mentioned, you know, the current chief curator and artistic director of MASP, the Museum of Arts in São Paulo, Adriano Pedroso. He's giving, you know, as part of the MASP program, he's giving quite a lot of emphasis on Afro-Brazilian and indigenous art. Is that correct?
Because ever since he took the helm of MASP, which was, by the way, completely kind of decadent. And, you know,
I remember those days.
Since the death of Pietro Maria Barra, who was the former director. So he took as a mission to kind of revive the original, you know, ideas put forth by Pietro and Lina Bobbani.
Of course, yes.
And so, as part of the original program, there was lots of exhibitions dedicated to arte popular, which doesn't translate well as popular art.
Not quite.
Not quite, but also like you know, indigenous or ethnographic objects, and you know, I think he's doing a great job. You know,
I think, you know, for what I've seen from distance, and whenever I go back to São Paulo, I've seen a complete different change. And again, you said something interesting now. There's a great difference between how some other Latin American countries treat their indigenous populations and everything that's produced by them, and the discourse that comes with it, and Brazil. And I think by cultural institutions in Brazil enhancing the lives of indigenous people in Brazil and what they produce and their relevance, then perhaps we can change our mentality.
Yeah, but what I would like to see as well is to have indigenous curators talking about that. You know, I think we're a long way in Brazil from a place where I can actually, like, let's say, black curators or indigenous curators or women curators having their own voice within the circuit.
No, absolutely, and bring more diversity to the discourse, to the debates.
Yeah, I think probably the next step should be.
I suppose have just the same sort of, you know, profile of people trying to treat somebody else's topic.
This is a very delicate topic, you know, like being the voice of the other.
Yes.
And I think that's this kind of also like very European patriarchal way of, you know, like, oh, let's give a little space to Latin American art from our perspective. Right,
no, absolutely, and categorizing it and all that, which is very 19th century. No, absolutely, no, we do need to change that. In relation specifically to the Brazilian art context, you mentioned the following in your essay entitled Contemporary Art Brazil, the São Paulo Biennial and the Rise of Brazilian Contemporary Art, which was published by James Hudson. And I quote, "It was not until 1998 that another São Paulo Biennial would have such a significant impact on the international scene. This time, however, it would also play a key role in securing Brazilian art's place in hegemonic art historical narratives. The 24th edition, organized by curator Paulo Heckenhoff, marked the coming age of the Brazilian art world, helped to consolidate the international presence of contemporary Brazilian art." I went to that biennial in 1998, and I remember I was obviously much younger. I was, of course, fascinated by art, and I was absolutely struck. Yeah. There was a very successful biennial. What's happened to the biennials, Kiki, and where are we now?
That's an interesting question.
Lost track.
I have to say I haven't been to the last edition of the São Paulo Biennial, like this year's edition.
Me neither, this one, but yeah, just really interested.
I think a lot has changed. For instance, I don't think you'd be able to put together an exhibition like the 24th São Paulo Biennial, which relied heavily on what's called it was like a former segment of a traditional segment of the biennial, which was the historical segment.
Yes, yes.
So like at that time, all biennials had a very kind of strong section dedicated to historical artists.
Right. Yes, I remember that. Yeah.
You know, with insurance prices nowadays. I mean,
of course,
you wouldn't be able to put together an exhibition.
I mean, it was huge, and it was so, if I may say, so high end.
Yeah. And you know,
the
maybe
resources put into that, it was absolutely
maybe
huge.
this is not the role of the biennial anymore, you know. But I think, you know, like over the last years, there have been better and worse.
Well, there have been a lot of scandals about the biennial. Of course, there were corruption, you know, allegations, and the president of the biennial, I'm not going to mention names here, was accused of corruption, and there was a lot of scandals, and he was also an art collector. So I think that kind of impacted the confidence.
Is the São Paulo Biennial is a private foundation that also receives benefits from
the state.
From the state, and it's funded mainly through the tax exemption scheme of the Lei Rouanet. So in a way, I mean, like, it's private, but it's also, you know, it's funded mainly by public money. So there's a bit of a conflict of interest, and the board. I mean, how the board is appointed, and you know, like the criteria for choosing curators is not very transparent.
Right.
So I think lots of the problems of the São Paulo Biennial were solved around 2010.
Right.
When the very corrupt president was
I remember those days, and of course a lot of journalists in Brazil whom I know who interviewed him.
And then there was an intervention by a group of businessmen that, you know, like actually kind of, you know, like cleaned out the accounts.
The accounts of the biennial.
Yeah. But there's still this very kind of old-fashioned administration that people are really in the dark as to, you know, the criteria for choosing curators, for choosing board members, and so it's still, I think there's still some adjustments to be made in order to have a biennial that reflects, you know, other contemporary biennials of the same scale, because the São Paulo Biennial is the second biennial that was created globally. You know, like, it has a huge history, it has an important position.
It took Picasso and Chagall to São Paulo in a, you know, very earlier on.
But if you think of it, like, the last woman to curate a São Paulo Biennial, for instance, was Lisette Lanhado in 2006.
Yes.
So these appointments, they don't really reflect the changes that are happening globally within the art world.
Right.
You know, like a biennial of this scale, not to have a woman chief curator for more than 10 years, like especially the last 10 years.
Absolutely, yes.
It's a bit, and it's not
strange.
Like they are only hiring local curators or Brazilian curators. They're hiring people from all over the world. So what that implies is that there isn't one female curator in the world capable of curating
an exhibition. Yes, it's quite problematic, and not very nice. Quite embarrassing.
It's very kind of, I would say, out of step with
touch with reality. Really, the world is sort of progressing. What would you like to see happening personally in the biennial? Would you like to see the biennial giving a particular focus on Latin American art, or would you like to see a very globalist approach to it moving forward?
I mean, it really depends. I mean, I want a biennial. You mean specifically the São Paulo Biennial?
The São Paulo Biennial, yes. In order to for being, of course, such a hotspot for art in Latin America.
I think, yeah, maybe it would make sense to have like a strong presence of Latin American artists, but because obviously, I mean, people are traveling from all over the world to see something special that they're not going to see in Berlin or in you know, Venice or Documenta.
Yes.
So maybe, yeah, maybe that could be. But ultimately, I would like to see a Barreiro that surprises me. Like,
yes, of course.
Like that excites me.
Yes,
like,
that brings something completely new.
Yeah.
And I remember, I don't know how old I would have been, but in 1998. But I remember being completely, and I was already at the time in love with art history, and being completely struck by how they told the story and juxtaposing historic art with contemporary at the time, and really, really interesting. Yeah, we look forward to seeing that changing.